Hi folks, welcome to RJ Impact. Today I'm going to explore the phenomenon that is Elizabeth Holmes' deep baritone voice. I've found some clips where you can hear Elizabeth speak in conversation where she apparently lets her guard down and reverts to what people consider must be a normal voice. When you hear those, you'll be able to make an assessment yourself and make your own mind up. By the way, I'd originally thought that I'd juxtapose a few clips of Elizabeth's voice, high and low, together and present the video as a there you go, make of it what you will. You'll see I actually ended up going down the woman's deep voice rabbit hole on this. I'll share a couple of the things I found out along the way and I hope you find them interesting. This is an inspiring step forward, is the phrase that Amanda Seyfried repeats over and over until satisfied with the end result. Amanda Seyfried actually played Elizabeth Holmes in a miniseries called The Dropout, which aired first in 2022.
New technology.
Here, at Theranos, we are developing new technology.
This is an inspiring step forward.
Forward. This is an inspiring step forward.
Elizabeth Holmes' voice has become somewhat synonymous with the whole persona that Elizabeth herself cultivated, and having covered both Theranos trials week by week, it would be a bit remiss of me not to address one of her defining characteristics. And just in case you are wondering who on earth Elizabeth Holmes is, the 2-minute synopsis goes as follows. Elizabeth Holmes founded her company Theranos at 19 years old, having dropped out of Stanford University to do so. 12 years later, at 31, she was lauded everywhere for having grown the company to a $9 billion valuation. She was known for her emulation of Apple's Steve Jobs, wearing pretty much nothing but black turtlenecks as her everyday attire. Following whistleblower revelations, it transpired that Theranos, instead of completing blood tests on its own devices called the Edisons, was secretly performing them on purchased third-party machines. Any tests performed on its own devices were flawed and unreliable. For enticing funders to invest in the flawed company, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud and sentenced to 11 years in prison. So what is it with Elizabeth and her voice? Well, it is very distinctive. Listen to this short clip and you'll see what I mean.
The right to protect the health and well-being of every person, of those we love, is a basic human right.
Inevitably, speculation arose as to whether it's natural or fake. People with patience far more than I have trawled clips of Elizabeth high and low and picked out a couple where she appears to lapse, as it were, into her natural voice, and I'll play those shortly. The ultimate goal, in my opinion, in lowering her voice can only be to try to achieve a certain gravitas and perhaps allow her to be taken more seriously in what was then and still is a male-dominated Silicon Valley. By the way, I'm not supporting or disagreeing with this, just making a hypothesis as what may have been a motivation for Elizabeth to deepen her rhetoric if the voice, as I'll call it, is truly faked. As I said earlier, you can make up your own mind when you hear the clips. I did a bit of research to see if there were any other examples of voice lowering that might show this isn't just isolated to Elizabeth, and in doing so I came across a couple of serious articles addressing this. I'll share the main points shortly. Anyway, did I find anyone who's done something similar? Well, yes, none other than UK's former Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. Her distinctive timbre is apparently due to the elocution lessons she took right in the middle of her career. She actually had fairly sexist comments made about her in her early career, with people dubbing her voice shrill and patronising. One famous TV critic, Clive James, said it was like a cat sliding down a blackboard. One of the things Thatcher also did is slow her delivery down a lot, and I think her pace is similar to Elizabeth Holmes. Here's a 30-second clip of Thatcher pre- and post-elocution lessons.
I've been so busy that I haven't had really much time to think about it. After all, I know I'm still only me, and so do my family. But I'm very much aware of the responsibilities, and a little bit apprehensive. Who wouldn't be, when you think of the names that I follow?
Let me answer that very deeply, because I feel very strongly about it. The greatest divisions this nation has ever seen were the conflicts of trade unions towards the end of a Labour government.
And again, to compare and contrast, here's another snippet of Holmes at a TED Med conference.
A world in which no one ever has to say, "If only I'd known sooner." A world in which no one ever has to say goodbye too soon.
So is it true that people who speak with deeper voices actually achieve more gravitas or are taken more seriously by others? Well, in 2019, an international team of psychologists analysed the speech of men and women when answering two questions, one that asked for directions and the other for career advice. When responding to the latter, a question that required specialist knowledge, they found that both men and women spoke in deeper voices than when answering the former. But women lowered the pitch of their voices to a greater extent than men in order to assert their expertise. A low-pitched voice is a signal of testosterone, and testosterone is a signal of dominance, said one of the researchers. For women, there is more of a reason to modulate the voice. Given our culture and the push for feminist rights, women are speaking in a lower pitch to exert these masculine features that seem to give benefits in our society, to sound like leaders, to sound more competent, said another researcher. In case you're interested in this, I'll leave a link to the source for this in the notes below. So without further ado, let me play the first Elizabeth Holmes clip.
No, it hasn't. Well, if I use traditional words to describe what we're doing, it's hard. No, it hasn't. Well, if I use traditional words to describe what we're doing, it's hard. No, it hasn't. Well, if I use traditional words to describe what we're doing, it's hard.
Now, some people have pointed out that the way Holmes speaks is evidence of her being a psychopath. I'm not qualified to know whether that's right or wrong, and nor I assume is Amanda Seyfried, but nonetheless I'll quote her. If you're trying to be taken seriously by all these powerful men, what else do you do? So we do apparently have the video evidence of Holmes speaking and clearly changing her pitch, and I would say tempo also, and you can, as I said earlier, make up your own minds. So what about the people who knew her or know her? Well, I can't do better than show you Phyllis Gardner's take on this. Now, she's a professor at Stanford and one of the very few people who were sceptical of Elizabeth's inventions right at the very beginning.
That is a voice you don't forget in a woman. Oh, hello. Yes.
She says with this low voice, and I'm like, oh my God.
I won't include a clip, but apparently Paris Hilton has actually confessed to changing her voice during all of those reality programs and other interviews that she does. However, unlike Elizabeth, she's actually gone the opposite way and raised her pitch. She explained that the baby-like timbre that she's used for decades has been a way for her to hide away her true self from the public. And yes, there is research on this too. I'll put the source in the comments for this as well. Researchers have found that higher female voices are associated with physical attractiveness. They quote, "From an evolutionary point of view, high-pitched signifies youth. Youth is a signal of fertility. So if you're wanting to project yourself as an attractive woman, a high pitch is the way to do that." And they also say, the higher your voice is, the more vulnerable you'll be perceived to be. Like a little girl, it comes back to what's sellable to men. Okay, I've got my hard hat on here. I can feel the brickbats and stones headed my way. I suspect that some of these comments will evoke some passion amongst some viewers. My disclaimer is I'm just reporting on what I've found. I'm not taking a stance either way on any of it. Okay, let's move on quickly. Here's another clip of Holmes.
What steps or strategies are being taken to make the blood test applicable and adaptable for optimal performance for people with disabilities? This is from Angela Lee Foreman.
Yeah, one of the first people that we served came into our wellness centers was a quadriplegic and came in asking if they could do a finger stick. And our team in Arizona called us and said, what do we do? And because the man didn't have fingers. And it turned out he had a nub on his elbow, and we talked to our lab team, and they said, okay, you can do the draw. And so they did this, what would have been a finger stick on this little nub on his arm, and he broke into tears because up until that point, the way that they had to draw blood is through a needle in his neck. And it's so painful and so dehumanizing that it's an incredibly emotional process. So what is interesting about the way that technology can be applied is we certainly didn't design this with that use case in mind, but it becomes possible when you distribute and decentralize and make more accessible the process. And that's something that is really important to us because our mission is every person, right? Person, period. Yeah.
So, as well as Phyllis Gardner being an eyewitness, so to speak, or should that be ear witness? I don't know. Anyway, a lot of ex-work colleagues and acquaintances also say that they've heard Holmes occasionally slip back into what you would think would be her normal voice. According to ABC Radio, one former employee said, "It was maybe at one of the company parties and maybe she had too much to drink or whatnot, but she fell out of character and exposed that that wasn't necessarily her true voice." Our third clip of Ms. Holmes.
So dehumanizing that it's an incredibly emotional process. So, well, it's wonderful to be here. I started this company because so dehumanizing that it's an incredibly emotional process. So, well, it's wonderful to be here. I started this company because...
So after that, the only people I could find that apparently say Holmes' voice is natural are her family, some of whom say she sounds just like Granny such and such. I'm going to be very cynical here and point out that this is definitely a biased sample, and don't forget that these people also maintain Elizabeth is innocent, so perhaps their judgment is a bit clouded. Elizabeth herself has denied it, but then her reputation for being scrupulously honest and maintaining the bar of truth as high as possible is possibly under some question to anyone who followed the trial. So what do I conclude? Well, unusually for me, I'll give you my opinion. I think that the voice is definitely contrived and not a natural voice, which people, including you now, occasionally hear when she lets this whole persona drop and reverts to type. I would say, however, it is possible that part of her general persona may have been adopted subconsciously, and perhaps that impacts her timbre somewhat also. She was just trying to be this image she saw in her head, a very different contrast to the Holmes appearing at court every day holding her mother's hand, don't you think? And I'll finish the video with a plea. If anybody has any other examples of Elizabeth's voice change, I'd be really grateful if you could send me a link. If I get enough to make sense, then I'll put them all together just as a montage, just as they are, for posterity, as they say. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you hit the notification bell, you won't miss out on it if and when it gets published. So that's all from me on this front. See you next time. Bye for now.